What's up, guys? So on a recent video that I published called The Volume Curve That's Killing Your Gains, I got a comment from J Mac. Shout out to J Mac. Seems we have a few things in common, man. You know, we used to skate, we love heavy music, and of course, we lift weights. He probably won't see this video, but I wanted to make it because he disagreed with what I mentioned in that video. And I replied to him, of course. I'll throw up the interaction here in a second. But I wanted to actually address the comment and the reply in a video and be very clear about that, okay? And by the way, for those who don't know me, I've been coaching for 20 years. I've written 4 books. I've published 3 peer-reviewed papers. I used to teach trainers at college, and I've transformed hundreds of bodies. Okay, so if you're interested in coaching, top link in the description goes to my school community. All right, so let's get into it. So basically, in my video, I mentioned that after a certain point, more volume is not going to produce more growth. It's a point of diminished returns. And now, of course, this looks different for everyone. But the answer is, it's not to just keep adding volume. And this represents that inverted U, where it is a point of diminished returns. And J Mac made a comment saying that the inverted U volume curve is basically non-existent. It's not a thing. Okay, and actually I want to show you that interaction here. So it was on, like I said, this video right here. And this is J Mac right here. There is no inverted U curve. There's no literature supporting it. It's hypothesis, it's never happened. And when it's been attempted, it doesn't happen, basically, even when they've tried to do it. So this is his comment. This is my reply to him, okay? But basically, he's saying in the research, they add more volume, and the added volume elicits more muscle growth. And there's no cutoff, right? There's no cutoff from a muscle hypertrophy response standpoint. Okay, so essentially he's implying that diminished returns do not exist. And of course, like I said, he also said that all the literature shows that more volume is better. All the literature shows you adapt to more volume. Now, that's not entirely true, but let's get into this. So issue number 1, most volume studies are short-term by nature. Now, it's difficult and expensive to run true long-term hypertrophy studies, but this creates a major problem because they only capture early adaptations and not what necessarily happens after. So in the real world, not a clinical setting, things happen that we don't see. Fatigue accumulates. Recovery becomes limited. And training stress compounds, basically. So while the data might look clean in the short term, it doesn't reflect how the body actually behaves over time, basically. So what you have is, in these studies, they are essentially what we would call a mesocycle, 8, 10, 12 weeks. Mesocycles. Now, in a mesocycle, you can often tolerate higher volumes. Also, performance can improve in short term. And these adaptations, they look linear. They just keep going up. But over time, the fatigue builds, stimulus quality drops, and recovery adaptation becomes more difficult. So short-term hypertrophy, that response, it doesn't always carry over to long-term hypertrophy response. Now, issue number 2 is that hypertrophy isn't driven by volume alone. That's kind of a reductionist view of a much bigger system, if you will. This is very similar to the HIIT guys, thinking that if you add more volume, that's bad, and intensity is all that you need. Now, muscle growth is influenced by multiple stimulus variables. And this is the hypertrophy stimulus hierarchy that I proposed in my last paper. And of course, we're always after mechanical tension because that's what produces muscle hypertrophy primarily. And it's influenced by many variables: progressive load, right? Intensity of effort, volume, and frequency. And then of course we do have secondary variables. But these are the fundamentals, okay? Now these variables interact with each other over time, and you adjust these stimulus variables based on things like how somebody's progressing in strength, how muscular they're becoming, how a person responds, okay? It's not just about applying exercise stress. It's more like we need to understand how to manage that stress. So it's not just like, oh, just tack on more volume. We have to see how a person interacts long-term with the stimulus variables and then adjust accordingly based off of that response. Now, you need to remember that volume, as it increases, fatigue accumulates and recovery becomes hampered, basically. At a certain point, this creates an imbalance between stimulus and fatigue. So just adding more volume, it doesn't necessarily guarantee more growth. It could, but it doesn't guarantee it. It depends on a host of factors if more sets is in fact the answer. And this is something that you assess over time, like I said. So these short-term studies that, they're cool. They show these hypertrophy outcomes, but they're not going to necessarily guide you, okay? And this is where coaching comes in, obviously, right? So that being said, top link in the description, tap it, it goes to my school community. Let's train, okay? This is what I've been doing for years on end. I coach people in person, you guys, okay? I'm not some online fitness influencer who's never coached people in person, and only coached myself in person, no. All right, so this stuff, these fundamentals are really important, and you have to know how to navigate them and adjust as you respond as time goes on, okay? Now, issue number 3, we have research limitations, okay? So, yeah, there's a lot of high volume studies that show more sets equals more growth. But one of the major issues is how muscular failure is defined, and more importantly, how it's applied. I don't know about you guys, but I've seen some of these these guys out there, these researchers, how they actually apply failure in their own training. And I can tell you guys, I'm not impressed. I'm not convinced that they understand what it means and how to actually apply it. Okay, so no sale here. And also keep in mind, you guys, most of these researchers, they're not coaches. Some of them are. But the majority of them doing all this research, they're not coaching people. This is, this is not their vocation. They don't do this day in and day out. And a lot of them, some of them don't even lift. So let's keep that in mind, okay? Now, if I had to guess, I would say that the subjects in most of these studies are anywhere from 3 to 5 reps away from failure, okay? And if they're complete, like beginner, untrained subjects, they are for sure in this realm, if not further out, okay? So if that's the case, and I'm not even convinced that if they're intermediate, that they're going to true failure. I mean, have you guys seen some people like train in the gym? Like the majority of people do not train hard. The majority of people in the gym, even if they're advanced, you watch them do a set and bar speed does not slow down. Okay? It doesn't involuntarily slow down. So I'm not convinced that most people just train hard in general. Okay? So you're not going to convince me that in their research they are. Now, if that's true, which I believe it to be true, this means that each set is a weak stimulus, okay? In that case, more sets are required just to compensate for the lack of intensity, not because volume itself is superior. So this is very important to understand, you guys. It doesn't prove that volume is better. It just proves that lower effort requires more work. So if you're copying this as a natural lifter, you're likely doing more work than needed for potentially worse results. So another problem is set quality, which these issues, these limitations with the failure and the set quality, and I have a third one here, it all comes down to basically how are they performing reps and sets, okay? So set quality is a big one, and muscular failure plays into that. But in a lot of these studies, they have short rest periods, so usually 60 seconds, and well, in one particular study, but this is kind of common here, and you'll have high set counts, okay? So, and that's probably just by design, just to get through the damn workout. Now, usually this creates a scenario where there's reduced effort with every subsequent set. So if they're doing high volume with minimal rest times, I'm willing to bet they are executing fast repetitions with substandard form. Now, I will say, if you're more advanced, or if you have someone coaching you, okay, this can work. Shorter rest periods can work, depending. But in most cases, set performance falls apart. Okay, people cannot keep it together, especially beginners and intermediates. It's harder, it's more difficult. And then you tack on what exactly is the movement. Is it a leg press or a barbell back squat? That's a whole different thing right there, which we'll get into as far as exercise selection. But that tacks on more complications here, depending your exercise selection hedged up against your rest interval here. So if the sets fall apart, this translates into lower mechanical tension per repetition. So yeah, volume is high, but again, the actual stimulus per set is low. It's not high. So like I alluded to in the previous slide, exercise selection. So example, in the popular Brigado study, they were doing barbell back squats. So what failed? Okay, so they were doing, in my previous slide I was mentioning, their rest periods were very short, so a minute, and they were doing high volume, and they were doing barbell back squats. So what failed? Was it the quads? Was it the low back? Because this will matter, especially the structure of somebody. Right? Some people are built for squats. Other people, like me, at 6'2", I'm not. So was it the quads that failed? Was it the low back? So what was actually being stimulated in these sets? So the volume that is applied, right, what's not being applied in high concentrations to the targeted muscles. So it begs the question, what muscles were maximally stimulated? Not to mention instability, back squat, barbell back squat. It can be unstable for some people, depending, okay? This reduces tension on the targeted muscles, all right? Now again, especially if they're not seasoned, if they're not seasoned lifters, which in most cases, the test subjects in the research, they're not. Now in this Brigado study, the criteria was at least 1 year experience. It's not horrible, but I don't know if I would qualify that as trained, right? But the barbell back squat is the most skilled movement we got. Like, it is the most skilled movement. People screw this up all the time. And you're taking these dudes to failure, quote unquote failure, and you're doing high volume, and the rest periods are 60 seconds. Guys, exercise selection in research, it matters. Okay, it does matter. Now, my entire point I'm trying to make is that high volume may have worked in these studies because it compensates for poor stimulus quality, not because more volume is inherently superior. But because of the studies, most people think more volume equals more growth. Okay, but maybe these other variables that we're speaking about, maybe they're just poorly controlled. Because the way that I see it, when training is executed properly, when sets are taken to true muscular failure or close, or exercises have better stability and target the muscles effectively, or when reps are performed with control and intent. Right? Now, if you have these variables that they do matter in a set, and they're tightly controlled, now you have a stimulus. And the quality of each set increases, which means you don't need as many sets to create a strong hypertrophic outcome. I also want to point out that, and this is, and I mentioned this in my paper as well, that when James Fisher and James Still and colleagues, whenever they conduct their research, they show that lower volumes often produce comparable results with muscle growth compared to the higher volume research. And I think, and I know these guys come from more of a HIIT background, but it's because they understand the definition of intensity of effort. Okay, and most importantly, it's the application. Okay, not to mention, exercise selection is better and repetition execution is controlled with intent. These things matter. You know, rep and set quality is better, it's higher. And you're going to produce similar, if not better, outcomes on less volume. Now going back, I thought I had that spelled wrong. Now going back to the claim that there's no inverted U curve with volume. So JMac is basically saying diminished returns don't exist. At least that's how I took the comment. So again, saying that there's no inverted U curve ignores how fatigue and recovery actually work. You can't just look at high volume studies in isolation without accounting for real physiological constraints. There's a threshold where additional volume no longer improves the stimulus, and that's basically junk volume. But it will further increase systemic fatigue. Now, once you cross that point, you're not building muscle anymore. You're digging this deeper recovery hole that you have to now get out of. It's just more sets, more volume. And you have to recover and then adapt. The body doesn't just endlessly adapt upward with more volume. You stall because the body can't recover and adapt. It's really that simple. But as I keep saying, this is more of an issue with naturals. I've been saying that across my channel. So if you're natty, you can't copy what the enhanced guys are doing. All right, this shows up all the time, guys. Lifters push excessive volumes, they stop progressing, and it's because their recovery demands, it exceeds what the system can support. All right? So guys, if volume was really the main driver of hypertrophy, the average natural lifter would be more jacked, but they're not. And I say this because volume is the most abused stimulus variable. All right, so again, if volume was the key to muscle growth, then there would be a lot more guys that looked a lot better than they do. But that's not the case because people are already doing too much volume without focusing on key components like getting stronger and intensity of effort. So yeah, you guys, diminished returns, it's a reality, especially when you are natural. Okay, top link in the description. Tap it, takes you to my school community. Let's train, let's keep you natty, and let's get you jacked.